What happens when a divorce trial becomes a social media spectacle? When the mistress isn't content with just taking the husband, but wants to shatter the wife's dignity in front of the entire world. For Dr. Alina Hayes, the courtroom was supposed to be a private hell. Instead, her husband's new love, Chloe Summers, turned it into her personal reality show, posting smiling selfies from the gallery, mocking the woman whose life she was helping to dismantle. But Chloe, so focused on her online audience, never imagined the quiet, heartbroken doctor in the defendant's chair was about to unleash a truth so devastating it would not only end the trial, but ignite a firestorm that would burn them all. Dr. Alina Hayes believed in systems. As a leading pediatrician at Seattle General, she understood that life, much like the human body, was a complex network of interconnected systems. A fever wasn't just a temperature, it was a symptom, a sign that the body's internal harmony was disrupted. For 22 years, her life with Richard Sterling had been a model of perfect harmony. Their home, a stunning glass and cedar structure overlooking Puget Sound, was her sanctuary. It was a testament to Richard's success in finance and her own dedication to medicine. They were the golden couple of their affluent Medina neighborhood. Richard, with his tailored suits, charismatic smile, and the almost predatory confidence of a man who ran his own successful investment firm, Sterling Investments. And Alina respected brilliant with a quiet grace that people found both calming and formidable. They had 2 children now grown and successful in their own right, a lawyer in New York and a software engineer in San Francisco. Their system had worked flawlessly, or so she thought. The first symptom was subtle, a slight chill in their interactions. Richard, who once shared every detail of his day, became vague. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket, screen down. He started working later, citing a volatile market that required his constant attention. When he came home, he smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. A sweet, cloying scent like gardenias and vanilla. A stark contrast to the clean, subtle fragrance she preferred. Alina, ever the diagnostician, tried to address the issue directly. "Rich, is everything okay?" she asked one evening as he loosened his tie without meeting her eyes. "You seem distant." "Just stressed, Ames," he'd replied, the nickname that once felt like a warm embrace, now sounding like a perfunctory pat on the head. "The market's a beast. You know how it is." She didn't, not really. His world of derivatives, hedge funds, and aggressive acquisitions was as foreign to her as pediatric oncology was to him. She had always trusted his domain, just as he trusted hers. That was the foundation of their partnership. But now that foundation felt like it was developing hairline fractures. The second symptom was more alarming. A credit card statement she happened to see listed a charge for a weekend at the Salish Lodge and Spa. She hadn't been to the Salish Lodge in years. When she questioned him, he was smooth, almost too smooth. "Oh, that. It was a corporate retreat. For my top performers," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "We had to book it on my personal card. The corporate account was flagged for a fraud check. It's already been reimbursed." It was a plausible lie. Richard was generous with his team. But it was delivered with a flicker of something in his eyes she'd never seen before evasion. The system was failing, and the alarms in her head, long dormant, began to chime softly. She started paying closer attention. She wasn't a snoop by nature. Her entire profession was built on trust and confidentiality. But this was her life, her system, and it was showing signs of critical failure. She noticed a new Instagram account he was following, @ChloeSunDays. The profile picture was of a stunningly beautiful blonde, probably 20 years younger than Alina, with large, expressive eyes and lips perpetually pursed into a photogenic pout. Her feed was a curated fantasy of luxury brunches, rooftop cocktails, and designer outfits, always with captions full of vapid motivational quotes. Alina felt a cold dread wash over her. It was a cliché, a walking, pouting, selfie-taking cliché. And it was happening to her. The final diagnosis came on a Tuesday in late October. The Seattle sky was a blanket of grey, the drizzle outside matching the cold misery coalescing in her chest. Richard had asked her to sit down in their living room, the one with the panoramic view of the water they had once watched together for hours. He didn't ease into it. There was no preamble of, "We need to talk." He delivered the news with the clinical detachment of a surgeon delivering a terminal prognosis. "Alina, I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Alina felt the floor drop out from under her. She stared at him, searching for the man she had married, the boy she had met in a college library, the partner who had held her hand through 2 difficult labors and the death of her father. She couldn't find him. In his place was a stranger, his face a mask of resolute indifference. "There's someone else," she stated. It wasn't a question. He had the decency to flinch, but only slightly. "Yes, her name is Chloe Summers. I love her. I want to start a new life." "Chloe Summers." Alina repeated the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. At Chloe, sun, days. The gardenia and vanilla perfume. The Salish lodge. The symptoms all clicked into place, revealing the brutal, ugly disease that had been metastasizing in her marriage. 22 years, Rich, she whispered the words, catching in her throat. "Our children, this home. Does any of that mean anything to you?" "Of course it does," he said, though his tone betrayed him. "It was a part of my life. But that part is over. My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, will be in touch with your lawyer. I want this to be quick and clean. I'll be fair." Fair. The word was a mockery. He was dismantling their shared history, their entire system, and he was calling it fair. Within a week, he had moved out. He didn't take much. Just his clothes, his watch collection, and a few pieces of art. The house, once a warm sanctuary, suddenly felt vast and empty. The silence was the loudest noise she had ever heard. Her lawyer, a sharp and empathetic woman named Isabel Rossi, warned her that Richard's definition of fair would be anything but. Men like Richard Sterling don't see a divorce as the end of a partnership. Isabel explained her office, a comforting space of mahogany and leather-bound books. They see it as a hostile takeover. He'll view every asset you're entitled to as a loss on his personal balance sheet. His lawyer, Marcus Thorne, is a shark. We need to be prepared for a fight. Alina, still reeling from the shock, just nodded. She felt like a patient, not a protagonist in her own life. She was numb, heartbroken, and utterly lost. The first legal documents arrived. Richard's financial disclosures painted a picture of a man whose successful firm was suddenly inexplicably struggling. Profits were down, investments had soured. The vast fortune Alina knew he possessed had apparently shrunk to a fraction of its size. "It's a classic move," Isabel said, her brow furrowed as she scanned the pages. "He's hiding assets, Alina, shifting money, devaluing his company on paper. The problem is proving it is like finding a specific needle in a continent of haystacks." But Alina's mind wasn't on the money. It was on the betrayal, the humiliation. That was the wound that festered, and it was about to be salted publicly by the woman who had replaced her. Chloe Summers was about to step out from behind her curated Instagram feed and into Alina's real life, ready to turn her private agony into a public spectacle. The King County Courthouse was an imposing, sterile building of concrete and glass that felt a world away from Alina's warm, child-friendly clinic. The preliminary divorce hearings began in a small, drab room on the 3rd floor. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Alina sat beside Isabel Rossi, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Across the room, Richard sat with his lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Richard looked impeccable, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed, his expression one of bored impatience. He refused to make eye contact with Alina, instead conferring in low tones with Thorne, who radiated an aura of smug aggression. But it wasn't her estranged husband or his pit-bull lawyer who made Alina's blood run cold. It was the woman sitting in the front row of the public gallery, Chloe Summers. Chloe was dressed not for a somber legal proceeding, but for a premiere. She wore a tight, blood-red dress that stood out like a yarn against the room's muted tones. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She held her phone in her lap, and as the proceedings droned on, she was far from idle. During a short recess, Alina's friend, Dr. Ben Carter, who had come for moral support, slid his phone across the table to her. "You need to see this," he murmured, his face grim. He had Chloe's Instagram page open. There for her 50,000 followers to see was a picture Chloe had just posted. It was a selfie taken from her seat in the gallery. She was smiling a triumphant, cat-like grin on her face. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was the back of Alina's head. The caption read, "Some days are for brunch, and some days are for justice. Hashtag winning hashtag new beginnings. Hashtag courtroom flow." Alina felt the air leave her lungs. It was a physical blow. The comments were already flooding in. "Yas queen. Get it. OMG. The drama. Spill the tea. Is that his ex in the background? So awkward. LOL. You look amazing." He definitely upgraded. Alina's private pain, her deepest humiliation, was now content. It was fodder for likes, for engagement, for a vapid influencer's brand building. She felt sick. Isabel saw her face and immediately understood. "Don't look at it, Alina. It's what she wants. She's trying to provoke you." But it was too late. The damage was done. The sanctity of the courtroom had been violated, transformed into a stage for Chloe's cruel reality show. This was just the beginning. At every hearing, Chloe was there, a silent, smirking tormentor. Each time she wore a new camera-ready outfit. Each time she posted from the courthouse. A selfie in front of the court building's main entrance. Caption: "Here to support my man. A king deserves a queen who will fight by his side. #loyalty, #power couple." A boomerang video of her high-heeled shoes tapping impatiently on the marble floor. Caption: "Hurry up and sign the papers already. Some of us have a future to build." By Felicia, moving on. The most galling post came during a particularly brutal session where Marcus Thorne was cross-examining Alina about her spending habits, trying to paint her as a frivolous spendthrift who had drained the marital finances. He brought up vacations, charity donations, even the cost of her son's graduate school tuition, twisting every act of generosity or family support into an indictment of her financial recklessness. Alina sat there, her voice trembling as she defended herself. feeling stripped bare under the court's scrutiny. During the lunch break, Chloe posted a photo of herself and Richard. They were at a chic restaurant nearby, clinking champagne glasses. Richard was smiling, looking relieved and happy. Chloe's caption was the final twist of the knife. "Celebrating a morning of truth. So glad the facts are finally coming out. Truth will set you free, unbothered." The implication was clear. Alina was a liar, and Chloe and Richard were the virtuous heroes of the story. The digital mob followed her lead, leaving comments calling Alina a gold digger and a bitter old hag. Her children saw the posts. Her colleagues saw them. The whispers at the hospital started the sympathetic glances that felt more like pity. Alina felt herself shrinking. The confident, respected doctor was being replaced by this public caricature, the scorned, pathetic ex-wife. She was losing control of her own narrative, her own identity. The legal battle was one thing. This public war of humiliation was another. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Alina sat in her vast, empty living room, the city lights twinkling mockingly across the water. She was scrolling through Chloe's feed, a form of self-flagellation she couldn't seem to stop. She saw pictures of Chloe redecorating the penthouse apartment Richard had leased for them downtown. Pictures of Chloe wearing a diamond bracelet Alina recognized as one Richard had bought in Antwerp, supposedly as an investment. The grief that had consumed her for months began to curdle. It slowly, surely transmuted into something else. It was a cold, hard substance forming in the pit of her stomach. It was rage. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the arrogance, the sheer unmitigated gall of Richard and Chloe flaunting their happiness, built on the ruins of her life. They thought she was weak. They thought she was a quiet, unassuming academic who would simply crumble. They saw her grief as a weakness, her silence as defeat. They had made a critical misdiagnosis. They had forgotten who she was. She was Dr. Alina Hayes. She didn't just treat symptoms, she found the cause. She was meticulous, patient, and relentless when it came to uncovering the truth. Her mind, trained to see patterns and anomalies in complex biological systems, began to turn from her own emotional wreckage to the puzzle of Richard's finances. He had called her a spendthrift. He had called his company's downturn unfortunate. He and his mistress were mocking her from a throne of lies. "All right, Rich," she whispered to the empty room, her voice low and steady. "You want to fight? You want to talk about truth?" She closed Instagram. She opened her laptop. The war of public opinion was lost, but the war of facts, of numbers of secrets buried in the digital ether that war had just begun. And in that arena, the smirking influence and the arrogant financier were about to discover that Dr. Alina Hayes was very much in her element. Alina's investigation didn't start with a flash of insight. It started with exhaustion and insomnia. Sleep had become a foreign country, and in the long, silent hours between 2 and 5 a.m., her mind, unable to rest, began to work. She made coffee not to wake up, but to focus the frantic energy that now coursed through her veins. Her living room, once a place of relaxation, transformed into a command center. She started with the documents Isabel had given her, the sanitized, lawyer-approved financial disclosures from Richard's firm. They were a masterclass in obfuscation. Revenue streams were convoluted, redirected through newly created LLCs, with innocuous names like Pacific Crest Holdings and Rainier Capital Group. On paper, Sterling Investments looked like it was bleeding money. But Alina knew Richard. He was a shark, but he was a successful one. He wouldn't preside over a failing company. He would sooner gut it and sell the pieces. This wasn't a decline. It was a performance. For 2 weeks, she hit nothing but dead ends. She combed through old bank statements, tax returns, anything she could find in the physical files left in the house. It was all the official paperwork, the public-facing financials that Marcus Thorne would have already vetted. The real story, she knew, was hidden somewhere else. The breakthrough came from a place of pure nostalgia, a memory so deeply buried she hadn't thought of it in years. One Saturday morning, cleaning out a dusty storage closet, she found a box of Richard's old college things she'd never had the heart to throw away. Inside, amongst faded sweatshirts and yearbooks, was his organic chemistry textbook. Richard had been a finance major, but he'd taken chemistry as a minor, something he was always oddly proud of. He loved the order of it, the logic. Flipping through the book, a specific memory surfaced. They were studying for finals in their dorm room. Richard was struggling to remember a long, complex formula. "You have to make a system, Ames," he had told her, tapping his temple. "A mnemonic. Something only you understand. That's how you protect valuable information." Alina froze the dusty book in her hands. A system to protect valuable information. Richard was a creature of habit and ego. He believed he was smarter than everyone else. His arrogance was his greatest vulnerability. If he were to hide millions of dollars, he wouldn't use a simple password, like their anniversary or their dog's name. That was for amateurs. He would create a system he believed was intellectually superior, something that fed his own self-image as a genius. She remembered his fascination with the periodic table. He loved the elegance of it, the way the entire universe could be organized into a simple chart. He used to make jokes using the element symbols. "I'm awesome," he'd say, pointing to gold. Or when he was tired, he'd claim he was full of argon and car ipton. A wild, improbable idea began to form in her mind. She sat down at her laptop and pulled up a list of his newly formed LLCs: Pacific Crest Holdings, Rainier Capital Group. She thought about his other passions. He was an avid, if mediocre, sailor. He loved luxury watches. He was obsessed with ancient Rome. She opened a browser and navigated to the login page for an old, obscure email service he had used back in the early 2000s, one he probably assumed was long defunct. She'd found the address on an old business card in the box. For the username, she entered R. Sterling. Now for the password. It was a long shot, a desperate guess fueled by coffee and a 20-year-old memory. She thought about his ego, his love for the best of everything. Gold, platinum, silver. She looked them up on the periodic table. Gold, our atomic number 79. Platinum, PT, atomic number 78. Silver, Ag, atomic number 47. He wouldn't just use the symbols. Too simple. He'd use the numbers, the core data. What if the password was a combination? She tried a few variations. O79 PT78 AG47. Invalid password. Gold, platinum, silver. Invalid password. She leaned back, frustrated. Think, Alina, think. How did his mind work? It wasn't just about the elements. It was about the story he told himself. He was the king, the emperor. She remembered a trip to Rome, where he'd been fascinated by the Praetorian Guard, the elite unit of bodyguards for the Roman emperors. What if the password wasn't for his email, but for something else? She remembered him setting up a secure cloud storage account years ago, a place he said he kept personal backups. The service was called Citadel Cloud. The name itself was a clue. A fortress. She went to the Citadel Cloud login page. She entered the same username, R. Sterling. For the password, She tried a new combination based on his obsessions. Sailing, Rome, money. She thought about the names of his boats over the years. The Centurion, the Oracle. She looked up the periodic symbol for gold, again AU. What about his favorite watch brand, Patek Philippe? P. And his first major stock market win, a tech company called Oracle Systems. O. It was a jumble. She stopped. She was overthinking it. Richard's ego was complex, but his methods might be simpler, just veiled in a layer of intellectual pretension. She went back to the elements. What if it was a phrase? He used to have a tacky paperweight on his desk that said, "The Gold Standard." Gold AU 79, Standard. What would he use for that? Maybe something foundational. Carbon C6, hydrogen H. 1. No, too basic. She took a deep breath and cleared her mind. Let's go back to the first idea. His favorite things. The most valuable things. Gold, platinum, silver. AU 79, PT 78, AG 47. Maybe he added a personal touch. Their anniversary. June 5th, 0605. She typed 0605. Invalid password. She was about to give up, to dismiss the whole idea as a sleep-deprived fantasy. But then she looked at the error message. It was slightly different this time. It said, "Invalid password. 3 attempts remaining before account lockout." The other sites hadn't given a countdown. This was it. This was a live account. Her heart began to pound. 2 attempts left. Think like him, Alina. Arrogant, smug. He thinks he's a Roman emperor. What did the emperors have? Power. Money. What symbolized that he had a collection of antique Roman coins. The denarius, the aureus, the solidus, aureus, the gold coin. AU. The symbol for silver was AG, argentum. What if the password was a sequence of his treasures? What if it was tied to the very companies he was using to hide the money? Pacific Crest Holdings. Rainier Capital Group. Wait, the names, Pacific, Rainier. They sounded so local, so mundane. It was misdirection. Richard was never that sentimental about Seattle. He was sentimental about money. She looked at the names again. Pacific Crest Holdings, PCH, Rainier Capital Group, RCG. It was corporate jargon. But what if it was a cover for something else? She went back to the email, the one she couldn't get into. Let's try the same logic. His initials, RS, Richard Sterling. He was that vain. And the year he founded his company. 1999. She tried RS 1999 invalid password. She let out a cry of frustration. This was impossible. She stood up and paced the room, the first hints of dawn coloring the sky outside. She was a doctor. She dealt in evidence, in data, in charts. This was guesswork, a shot in the dark. She sat back down, defeated. She was going to try one last time, a completely random guess before locking herself out. She looked at his college textbook again, at the periodic table printed on the inside cover. His favorite elements, gold AU, platinum P2. And one more he always joked about, because it sounded like his name. Rhenium Re. AU Pit Re. She thought about his process. He built systems. He would link it to something. His birth year, 1970. She typed, her fingers trembling slightly. Eupetri 1970 processing. The screen blinked. Access granted. She was in. She was inside Richard Sterling's forgotten digital tomb, and laid out before her were the first threads of the conspiracy that would unravel his entire empire. The email inbox was ancient, a digital graveyard from a bygone internet era. The interface was clunky, the design dated. Most of the messages were junk mail and newsletters from the early 2000s. For a moment, Alina's heart sank. Perhaps it was just a dead end, a forgotten account with nothing of value. But Richard was meticulous. He didn't leave loose ends, but he also didn't clean up his own digital history. In a folder on the left-hand side, labeled simply Admin. She found it. It wasn't a trove of bank statements. It was something far more damning. It was a series of email exchanges from 8 years ago with a man named Alistair Finch from a firm called Trident Trust, based in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. Alina's blood ran cold. The Cayman Islands, the quintessential destination for hiding money. She opened the first email. It was from Richard. To Alistair, Finch, Trident Trust, Tutquire. From R. Sterling at. Subject, Project Nightingale Ella. Destar, as discussed, proceeding with the establishment of Project Nightingale. Initial seed funding will be wired next week from a holding account in Zurich. Please ensure the corporate veil is unimpeachable. This needs to be completely divorced from any of my domestic activities. Absolute discretion is paramount. Regards, R.S. Project Nightingale. The name was a punch to the gut. Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. A name from her world, the world of medicine and healing. He had used it to name his scheme to defraud her. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it made her feel dizzy. She scrolled through the chain. Alistair Finch's replies were terse, professional, and chilling. He spoke of nominee directors, bearer shares, and layered corporate structures. It was a lexicon of deceit, a blueprint for making money disappear. As she dug deeper, she found more. A second project, codenamed Dings. Aureum. Latin for gold. Of course. This one was even bigger, established through a different facilitator in Liechtenstein. There were PDF attachments, incorporation documents for shell companies with names like Cerulean Ventures S.A. and Vertex Global Trading, all registered to post office boxes in Panama City and Tortola. It was a vast, intricate web of deceit stretching across the globe. For years, while Alina had been managing a pediatric ward, attending charity galas, and raising their children, Richard had been meticulously constructing a shadow empire. He had been siphoning off profits from Sterling Investments' consulting fees that were nothing more than laundered cash and bonuses he claimed were never paid, rerouting them into this untraceable network. The numbers were staggering. She found wire transfer confirmations buried in a subfolder labeled Receipts. $1.5 million wired here, $2.2 million there. Small enough amounts to not trigger immediate red flags. But over a decade, they had accumulated into a colossal hidden fortune. She did a quick rough tally on a notepad. It was north of $15 million, possibly much more. All of it completely absent from the financial disclosures he had submitted to the court. This was the struggling business. This was the reason he needed to be fair in the settlement. He wasn't just hiding assets. He had created a completely separate, secret financial life. Alina's hands were shaking, but not from fear or sadness. It was the adrenaline of the hunt, the cold fury of a woman who had been profoundly underestimated. She began to work with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. She couldn't just save these emails. Thorne's legal team could claim they were fabricated. She needed irrefutable proof. Using her phone, She took high-resolution photographs of her computer screen, making sure the URL and timestamps were visible in each shot. Then she used a secure software to methodically download every email, every attachment, every scrap of data. She saved them onto 3 separate encrypted USB drives, the kind journalists use to protect sensitive sources. In one email, she found the key that unlocked the next door. It was a message from Richard to Alistair Finch concerning access protocols. Alistair. For my direct portal access to the Aureum account overview, please use the same security credentials as my Citadel storage. It's cleaner that way. Alina's heart leaped. The same credentials. The password she had guessed. AUPTERE 1970. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She found the website for the offshore bank in Liechtenstein that managed Aureum Holdings. It was a discreet, professional-looking portal. She entered the username he'd specified in another email, RHSterling70, and the password. Access granted. The screen populated with a single stark page. It was a simple account summary. There were no transaction details, just a name and a number. Account name, Aureum Holdings, AG. Current balance, £8, 427, 301, 9 USD. Alina stared at the number, at the millions of dollars her husband had sworn under oath did not exist. She felt a wave of nausea followed by an icy calm. She took a screenshot. She printed the page. She documented everything. Next, she tried the Trident Trust portal for Project Nightingale. Same password. Another screen, another staggering number. Client Project Nightingale Trust. Assets under management. 954,812.50 sol. D. There it was. Over $15 million sitting in the sun-drenched havens of financial secrecy, all while he was having his lawyer tear her apart on the stand for buying groceries at Whole Foods. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that sealed Richard's fate, was in a folder labeled Personal. Alina clicked on it, expecting to find old photos or letters. Instead, she found a single password-protected PDF document named Contingency. She tried the same password. It opened. The document was a memorandum written by Richard to himself. It was a step-by-step guide on how to systematically dissolve the offshore accounts and repatriate the money through a series of art purchases and sham consulting fees over a 5-year period after his divorce was finalized. He had a timeline. He had names of art dealers in Geneva and contacts in Dubai. He had even drafted a section titled In Case of AH's Non-Compliance. AH, Alina Hayes. It detailed a strategy to use leveraged personal information to ensure her silence if she ever became difficult. It was a blackmail memo against his own wife. That was it. That was the moment the last vestiges of the man she had once loved died. In his place was a monster of greed and deceit. She finished her work as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the living room floor. She had the emails. She had the account balances. She had the blackmail memo. She had it all saved, encrypted, and triplicated. She showered and dressed for her meeting with Isabel Rossi, choosing her outfit with care, a simple dark blue suit. It was professional, serious, and utterly devoid of emotion. She felt a strange sense of peace. The grief was gone, burned away by the righteous fire of the truth. Chloe Summers could have her courtroom selfies. She could have her vapid captions and her fleeting social media fame. Alina Hayes was bringing the evidence. She was bringing the facts. She was about to walk into her lawyer's office and hand her the keys to the kingdom, and the weapon that would bring Richard Sterling's carefully constructed world crashing down around him. Isabel Rossi's office, usually a sanctuary of calm professionalism, became a war room. When Alina laid out the evidence, the printouts, the screenshots, the 3 identical USB drives placed side by side on the polished mahogany desk, Isabel stared at it all in stunned silence. She picked up the printout of the Orium Holdings balance. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were wide with disbelief. She read the blackmail memo, her expression hardening from shock to pure, cold fury. "Alina," she finally said, her voice a low whisper. "My God, this is a nuke. This isn't just a smoking gun. This is the whole arsenal." She looked up at Alina, seeing her client in a completely new light. The quiet, heartbroken doctor was gone. In her place sat a woman of formidable resolve. "How on earth did you find this?" "He underestimated me," Alina said simply. "They both did. They thought I was just the wife. They forgot I was a diagnostician." Isabel's shock quickly morphed into strategic excitement. A grin, sharp and predatory, spread across her face. "Marcus Thorne isn't going to know what hit him. Richard Sterling is going to prison Alina. This isn't just contempt of court for hiding assets. This is perjury, wire fraud, tax evasion. The feds are going to have a field day with this." They planned their strategy meticulously. They wouldn't file a motion beforehand. They wouldn't give Richard or his lawyer any warning. They would wait until they were in open court, until Richard was at his most arrogant, his lies hanging confidently in the air. They would detonate the nuke in public. The day of the next hearing arrived. The atmosphere was charged. Richard and Marcus Thorne were visibly confident. They had spent the previous sessions painting Alina as an out-of-touch woman, with no grasp of the complex financial realities of her husband's business. Today, Thorne was scheduled to make his final arguments for why the marital assets should be divided based on his client's severely diminished net worth. Chloe Summers was in her usual spot in the gallery. Today she wore a pristine white suit, an ironic choice for the dirt she was slinging. She gave Alina a brief dismissive glance before taking out her phone, no doubt preparing her next triumphant post. She looked bored, as if the proceedings were a mere formality before she could officially begin her life as the next Mrs. Sterling. Marcus Thorne stood up, his voice booming with false sincerity. "Your Honor, as we have demonstrated over the past several weeks, Sterling Investments has faced an unprecedented and unfortunate downturn. Mr. Sterling has been working tirelessly to keep the company afloat. The financial disclosures we have submitted are accurate and comprehensive. Dr. Hayes's expectations for a settlement, while perhaps understandable, are based on a financial reality that simply no longer exists." He went on for 20 minutes, weaving a tale of market volatility and bad luck. Richard sat beside him, the very picture of a beleaguered but noble captain going down with his ship. Alina felt nothing. She watched him lie to the judge, to the court, to everyone, and felt a profound, chilling detachment. When Thorne finally finished, he sat down with a satisfied smirk. "The defense rests its case on this matter, Your Honor." The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Eleanor Davies, turned to Isabel. "Ms. Rossi, your response." Isabel Rossi stood up slowly, a sheaf of papers in her hand. "Your Honor, we would like to present new evidence that has recently come to light. Evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Thorne's entire argument and the sworn financial declarations of his client." Thorne shot to his feet. "Objection. The discovery period is closed. The defense is ambushing us with—" "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Judge Davies said. Her eyes narrowed with interest. "I'll be the judge of what constitutes an ambush. Proceed, Ms. Rossi." Isabel walked to the clerk and handed over a thick binder with copies for the judge and for the opposing counsel. "Your Honor, what you have before you is evidence of a systematic multi-year scheme by Mr. Richard Sterling to defraud his wife and this court by hiding marital assets in a series of offshore accounts and shell corporations." A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Marcus Thorne snatched the binder, his face paling as he flipped through the first few pages. Richard's confident mask began to crack, his eyes darting from Isabel to the judge, a flicker of panic starting to burn behind his cool facade. In the gallery, Chloe finally looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed in confusion. Isabel's voice was clear and strong, ringing through the silent room. "We have evidence of an entity called Project Nightingale, registered in the Cayman Islands via Trident Trust, currently holding assets valued at approximately $6.9 million. She let the number hang in the air. Thorne was frantically flipping through the binder, his jaw slack. "We also have evidence of a second entity, Orium Holdings, managed through a bank in Liechtenstein with a current balance of over $8.4 million. Richard Sterling went white as a sheet. He looked like he had been physically struck. "These are not struggling businesses, Your Honor." Isabel continued, her voice dripping with controlled indignation. "This is a hidden empire built on lies and funded by money siphoned from the marital estate. Money Mr. Sterling swore under oath did not exist." She wasn't finished. She saved the worst for last. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have a document written by Mr. Sterling himself, a contingency plan. In it, he outlines his strategy to repatriate these hidden funds after the divorce is finalized. More disturbingly, it contains a section detailing a plan to blackmail Dr. Hayes into silence should she ever discover his fraud." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Every eye was on Richard Sterling, whose carefully constructed world was being publicly demolished brick by brick. Judge Davies's face was a thundercloud. She stared down from the bench at Richard, her disgust palpable. "Mr. Sterling," the judge's voice was dangerously low. "Stand up." Richard rose unsteadily, his body trembling. "Did you create these accounts?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, but Thorne was staring at the documents in his hands as if they were venomous snakes. "Did you draft a memo outlining a plan to blackmail your wife?" Judge Davies pressed her voice, rising. Richard just stood there, speechless, his face a mask of ruin. In the gallery, Chloe Summers's perfect pout had collapsed into a mask of horror. The numbers Isabel had read out, millions and millions of dollars, were now tainted. This wasn't a simple victorious divorce. This was a massive criminal conspiracy. The man she was about to marry wasn't just a wealthy divorcee. He was a felon. Her dream life was evaporating before her very eyes. The hashtag winning future she had been so smug about was now a public relations nightmare, a crime scene. Judge Davies brought down her gavel with a crack that made everyone jump. "I am freezing all known assets of Mr. Richard Sterling, both domestic and international, effective immediately. I am ordering a full forensic audit of his personal and business finances to be conducted by an independent examiner appointed by this court, and I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office and the Internal Revenue Service for criminal investigation." She stared directly at Richard. "Mr. Sterling, you and your counsel will remain. The rest of you are dismissed." As Alina and Isabel walked out of the courtroom, the spell was broken. A low murmur erupted. Reporters who had been loitering in the hallway drawn by the scent of a high-profile divorce, were suddenly scrambling their phones, buzzing with alerts. The theatre of humiliation was over. The theatre of justice had just begun. The fallout was not a distant thunderclap. It was a direct lightning strike, immediate and obliterating. The moment Alina and Isabel Rossi cleared the courtroom doors, the sterile quiet of the law was swallowed by the hungry chaos of the world. The scene in the marble hallway was a tableau of ruin. Reporters who had been lazily monitoring the case were now a frenzied pack, their phones held aloft like weapons, their questions shot out like bullets. But their main target wasn't Alina. It was the public implosion of Richard Sterling and Chloe Summers. Chloe, her face a grotesque painting of streaked mascara and crimson lipstick, had physically blocked Richard's path to the elevators. Her pristine white suit was already wrinkled, her hands clawing at his expensive lapels. The performance of the cool, untouchable influencer had shattered, revealing the raw, panicked desperation beneath. "What did you do, Richard?" She shrieked, her voice, a shrill instrument of pure terror that echoed off the cold stone walls. The crowd of reporters surged forward, a wall of flashing cameras and microphones. "Criminal investigation. The IRS, you swore to me it was just a messy divorce. You told me she was just a bitter old woman who didn't understand your business. Chloe, for God's sake, not here." Richard hissed, his face ashen. He tried to grab her arm to steer her away, but his touch was weak, his authority utterly gone. He looked like a deposed king stripped of his power, facing the fury of a mob he helped create. She wrenched her arm free, a wild look in her eyes. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. My entire life is online. My brand. I have 50,000 people watching me celebrate our victory right now. You didn't just lie to her, you lied to me. You've made me a clown, an accessory to a federal crime." Her accusations, born of pure self-preservation, were a spectacle. The woman who had built a career on curating a perfect life was now the star of a messy, viral, and brutally authentic drama. Before they even reached the street, clips of her meltdown were circulating on Twitter with hashtags like #Courtroom Collapse and #Sterling Scandal. Her own Instagram comment section, once a haven of fawning praise, became a digital pillory. The emojis of fire and crowns were replaced by snakes, bags of money, and clown faces. Memes appeared within the hour, her crying face photoshopped onto a get-out-of-jail-free card. Her courtroom selfie juxtaposed with the headline, "Future Mrs. Felon." She hadn't just lost a fiancé. She had lost her entire virtual kingdom, torched by the very man she thought was her king. For Richard, the consequences were far more tangible. His world didn't just collapse, it was systematically dismantled by the emotionless machinations of federal law. The following Monday, agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI descended on the sleek downtown offices of Sterling Investments. They weren't aggressive. Their quiet, methodical efficiency was far more terrifying. Employees were sent home as agents boxed up computers, confiscated servers, and carted away file cabinets filled with years of fabricated records. The news of the raid sent shockwaves through Seattle's financial community. Business partners distanced themselves. Clients panicked, and the value of his legitimate assets plummeted. The empire he had spent a lifetime building was rendered worthless in less than a week. He was arrested 2 weeks later. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic confrontation. 2 stern-faced agents met him at his lawyer's office, read him his rights, and led him away in handcuffs. The charges were a laundry list of white-collar crimes, 16 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of tax evasion, perjury, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the emails, the bank portals, his own damning blackmail memo, and the prospect of a humiliating public trial where every sordid detail would be laid bare. Richard folded. He took the plea bargain offered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. In exchange for his cooperation in identifying his offshore facilitators, he was sentenced to 12 years in a federal correctional facility. The divorce itself became a simple, brutal post-mortem. With Richard stripped of all power and credibility, there was no negotiation. Judge Davies, presiding over the final settlement, was merciless. Citing his appalling and malicious campaign of deceit, she awarded Alina a judgment that was both a restitution and a punishment. She received the full liquidated value of both Project Nightingale and Orium Holdings, a sum that, after the auditors were done, totaled over $16.2 million. She was also awarded the house on Puget Sound, the entirety of their shared art collection, and what was left of Richard's legitimate investment portfolio, after it was seized and partially liquidated by the government to pay his massive fines. The first time Alina walked back into the house after the final decree, the silence felt different. It was no longer the heavy, grief-stricken silence of loss. It was the light, clean silence of emptiness, of a space waiting to be redefined. She stood in the living room, looking out at the water, and felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. She had won. She had exposed the truth and reclaimed what was hers. But the victory was hollowed by the ghost of the 22 years of love she now knew had been, at least in part, a lie. A week later, she called a real estate agent. Selling the house was the final act of exorcism. She let go of the beautiful view, the shared memories, and the phantom pains. She purchased a stunning, light-filled condominium in the heart of the city, a place with no history, but the one she would create. The money, the staggering sum that Richard had worshipped and schemed for, felt like an abstraction to her. It was not a source of joy, but a tool of immense responsibility. After setting up trust funds for her children, she met with the board of Seattle General. There she made a proposal. She wanted to establish a new independent charitable wing of the hospital using a substantial endowment. Its sole purpose would be to provide elite-level comprehensive medical care to children of families who could not afford it, no questions asked. "I have a name for it," she told the board, her voice steady and clear. "I want to call it the Nightingale Foundation." In that moment, she took the name Richard had stolen and sullied, and she cleansed it. She transformed a symbol of his greed into a legacy of her own compassion. It was the ultimate reclamation. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Her work at the clinic was her anchor, a daily reminder of purpose and healing. The whispers at the hospital had long since faded, replaced by a quiet, profound respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the ink had dried on the final papers, she was walking through Olympic Sculpture Park, the metallic gleam of the art stark against the brilliant blue sky. She felt a sense of peace so complete it was almost startling. The anger was gone, the grief a distant scar. She was not the woman Richard had left, nor the woman who had fought him in court. She was someone new, someone forged in fire and settled in grace. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text message from a name that had become a gentle, steady presence in her life over the past year. Her friend, Dr. Ben Carter. "Coffee. My treat." Alina looked up from her phone, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. It was a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners bright with a future she was finally ready to embrace. It was a simple invitation, an offer of warmth and normalcy, a quiet counterpoint to the grand drama she had survived. She typed back a simple reply, "I'd love that." And as she walked towards the waterfront cafe, the sun warm on her face, she felt an overwhelming sense of lightness. She was not a victim, not a survivor, not a victor. She was simply Alina. And for the first time in a very long time, that was more than enough. Alina's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest strength is often found not in shouting the loudest, but in the quiet, meticulous pursuit of the truth. While Chloe and Richard played a game for an audience, Alina played the long game for her life, her dignity, and for justice. She proved that underestimating a quiet opponent is the most dangerous mistake one can make. If you were inspired by Alina's journey from heartbreak to empowerment, and if you believe that lies, no matter how well hidden, will always be brought into the light, then please support our channel. Hit that like button to show you stand for justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more incredible true stories of karma, courage, and the moment the tables are turned. Thank you for listening.